we're going to finish our panelists with Pervez Hoodbhoy, who is a nuclear physicist, an activist, a national security analyst, and a distinguished track record in academia, such that 10 years ago, Foreign Policy magazine included him among the 100 most influential global thinkers. He is going to talk to us about the magnitude that he thinks, or the limits of China's influence on Pakistan. And Pakistan is this big key player both in South Asia and on the China influence there. China's influence on Pakistan at geopolitical, economic, and cultural. Pervez Hoodbhoy, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Humphrey. Pleasure to see you again. I'm sorry I'm joining late, but it was beyond my control. I did hear Professor Clary. Unfortunately, I missed the speakers earlier. My canvas is going to be rather small. It'll be drawn principally from my experiences and my assessment on the limits of Pakistan-China engagement, which I expressed in a Dawn article published 3 weeks ago called "Don't Blame the Chinese." Normally, the Chinese do not react to what is published in Pakistani newspapers, but the Chinese Consul General chose to write a riposte, which said whatever I'd said in that was incorrect, but he did not actually put his finger on what it was that I wrote, which is incorrect. But let me give you a quick summary of that. Well, there were great expectations that Pakistan's economy would be utterly transformed by CPEC. And to this date, $62.5 billion investment, Chinese investment, has been made in Pakistan. Much of this has gone into infrastructure, which is roads, bridges, overpasses, underpasses, and electricity generation, principally. The hope was that this would bring a new era in Pakistan's economic development, but as we can see from the present situation, nothing of that sort has happened. In fact, Pakistan is now in a state of default, and it is still seeking a miserable $1.1 billion IMF bailout, which it hopes will save it for at least another few months. But then the question is, what happens next? So why didn't it work? Well, my contention in the article was that infrastructure is insufficient. You've got to have governance and you've got to have human capital. Both of these were absent. And so no matter what the intention of the Chinese was, good or bad, it hasn't worked. Governance, because we just don't know how much of this investment was used where, what were the terms of the agreement, what was the interest rate, where was it going? Now, much of this was in the hands of the Pakistan army, which insisted on being the controlling authority of CPEC. And you can see that indeed the infrastructure has been built with army companies, the Frontier Corps, the FCO, the Fauji Foundation, and so forth. And it's also clear that it's only been infrastructure that has been developed, that local industry has failed, that one doesn't have any evidence of new industries sprouting anywhere in Pakistan. Local employment has been small, and it has been essentially for labor. There has not been high-level participation. And so one way that was thought out of it was to send Pakistani students to China. And this I mentioned in my article, and I said that 30,000 of them have been sent there, but that too hasn't produced any significant result. In fact, I do know that several of my university students. In fact, people that I taught while they were undergraduates went there. Unfortunately, they didn't acquire the sort of skills that would be necessary for employability, and that by far. This in the engineering fields, this in the scientific fields, the others I don't know, but these are the fields that really matter. As I said, my canvas is going to be rather narrow, but perhaps it'll be of interest to you to know that I have just returned from Gwadar. Gwadar is the seaport which was developed by the Chinese. It's the gateway into the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, which was really what used to be said was the target of the Soviet Union. And through accessing the warm waters of the Arabian Sea, the Soviet Union would expand its influence. Well, whatever that argument now has come to mean, the fact is that the Chinese are very much there. But they're there and invisible. As you go along, you see massive fortifications, you see bunkers, you see little forts on the tops of hills with machine guns pointed down everywhere along the CPEC highways, as well as side roads leading to them. And the Chinese are very sequestered. They have very little interaction with the rest of the population. In fact, there are people in Gwadar who have not seen a Chinese at all. Nevertheless, there's a full-fledged port there. The port is rather empty, I must say. I asked how many ships have entered this in the last 10 days, and the answer was 3. And this is far from the dream that was once sold to Pakistan, that this would become the Dubai of Pakistan. It turns out that shipping has, of course, decreased in Karachi as well, because the impending default means that ships are no longer willing to unload their containers. Even the ones which have made it to Karachi are not willing to unload their containers unless they are paid for the freight charge in dollars, and there are no dollars left. So perhaps it is not unusual that only 3 ships have been seen there in the last several days. But even if the dollars come about, I am actually quite bewildered by how this could have been sold as a port that would compete with Dubai. It's 660 kilometers from Karachi, which is really the gateway to Pakistan. And the road is not a level road. It's called the coastal highway, but it goes through very mountainous areas. And there you can see why there are so many fortifications, checkposts at every point. So it seems to me, and it seems now to practically everyone, I mean, there are very few people who would maintain that CPEC has delivered its promises. Well, those promises were extravagant, but one could have hoped for a lot better than what one is seeing today. We do have now from China a $30 billion loan to pay. And the interest on that, unfortunately, no one knows. Probably the state bank now knows. Earlier on, the state bank would request from the CPEC authorities details of what were the transactions carried out, and that information was denied. But I think this is one of the good things that the IMF has done. It has forced the government to instruct every one of its organs that they better come clear on what the terms of the agreement were It's one thing to have agreements at the state-to-state level, but there are also a lot of Chinese companies and Chinese banks which are involved, and they're involved to very different degrees. And I'm sure that the accountancy of this must be pretty complex. I'd say one thing that was expected but didn't happen, which was that the Chinese would have a lot of, over time, cultural influence in Pakistan. That has proved to be too difficult. Now, let me say that this is not for lack of trying, because the Chinese language was introduced into a number of schools. It was implemented to a degree, but then from what I hear, it's pretty much petered out. Well, it's a difficult language to learn. There's very little cultural contact between Pakistanis and Chinese. And the Chinese don't feel comfortable. They have also not tried very hard to learn the local language, Urdu, or any of the other languages in the regions in which they operate. And so the distance has been pretty much constant. There's been no reduction in it that I can see. Looking into the future, I don't see CPEC fulfilling its promises. I don't see China's influence in Pakistan growing to the extent that many had surmised. It is being seen even in the upper levels of government in Pakistan and the army that the United States cannot be totally alienated. And this in spite of the fact that Imran Khan had said that he was removed by the United States. He's pretty much has had to take that back and blame it onto an army general, General Bajwa. Should he come back to power, which appears very likely, I think he will be forced by circumstances not to make such statements again, and perhaps put a bit of distance between himself and the Taliban, with which he was so closely associated with. So in conclusion, I'll say that the Chinese are probably rethinking their relationship with Pakistan. It's not proved to be that rosy. And as attacks upon Chinese workers in Pakistan have proved, they don't feel safe, and they're probably wanting to go home. And I don't see this relationship as growing. It's unfortunate, in my opinion, that this has happened, because there is a great deal that Pakistan could learn from China. It's not just the technology, but also the way in which they work. I mean, their work ethic, their hard work, which is actually one thing that Pakistanis now deeply admire, having watched them from close. But well, I guess that's the way things are. That's all I have to say. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Pervez. And it's a very vivid picture you painted about the language or lack of it, the lack of cultural contact. The machine guns that you saw on the high fences, is that the Chinese military or are they private Chinese security companies?
No. It is the Pakistan army. And the Pakistan army is all over Balochistan. And this is actually one of the, that is a basic source of resentment of the Baloch. They think, and well, I don't blame them, that they feel they're colonized by Punjab and the rest of Pakistan, well, basically by the Punjab. The security points are ubiquitous. You're stopped here, you stop there, you stop there. And between Gwadar and Karachi, 660 kilometers, I think we were stopped in 20 places. But it's even worse than that. When you go into Gwadar, so I went from a place called Turbat, you see these machine gun nests everywhere. And I actually stopped at a point and engaged with an army officer over there, and had a long conversation with him. He wasn't happy at being there. He was a very bright young man, and he wanted to get out of there. But he said, "Look, we have to be here, otherwise the terrorists will attack all the assets that we have over here." Now, this is a kind of classic colonial argument.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting, the picture that seems to be emerging from this discussion, that China's reach is very limited from a number of reasons. They won't have so much money, they're unpopular, and this sort of thing. Amit Rana asks a question, I wonder if you might address it. How might nations such as Pakistan and Sri Lanka strengthen their own political systems so that they're less susceptible to China's influence?
Well, I don't know about Sri Lanka. That's a completely different situation. But Pakistan has always relied upon its geopolitical situation. So earlier on, it was the United States, which Pakistan heavily leaned upon, and the United States, because it wanted to fight the Soviet Union everywhere and anywhere, it was a very comfortable alliance. The Pakistanis say that we were used by the United States, and the United States said that Pakistan wanted to be used. So that's the way it was until 2020, when the US completely lost interest, or was it when the Taliban took over, August of 2021? Yeah. So after that, US interest in Pakistan has essentially evaporated. And
but is it strong enough? I mean, Pakistan's the big one, but we've mentioned Bangladesh here, with Sri Lanka's come up, Nepal, of course. Are these nations going to be strong enough to build fair institutions that can actually be a front against anybody that's coming in and trying to influence them?
This is the big question. And now there is a huge uncertainty within Pakistan. In fact, young people that I've been talking to today have been so depressed. Most would flee the country if they could, but of course they cannot. Some will still try. There's a huge youth bulge. Most of them don't have skills because the education system didn't equip them with that. There's so much religion that is thrust into education that there has been little time and space left over for critical thinking, for science, math, etc. And so they're seriously skill deficient, and now they do realize that, and yet they're powerless because that's how the state made them be.
So to answer that question, it's not happening. And a very detailed question you might not be able to answer. So Seng Hasnam Sering says that Ukraine is putting China in an uncomfortable situation vis-a-vis relations with Russia. Gilgit in South Asia is another piece where China-Russia relations will be tested. Have you got a comment on that?
On Ukraine? Well,
no, not on Ukraine. On Gilgit, this patch specifically where China and Russia come face to face.
Okay, Gilgit. On the Karakoram Highway, you see Chinese influence into the next 50 miles or so, but then once you leave the Gilgit area and you come down, then the Chinese are of course in the big cities, but where they live they live in different places over there. They don't socialize with others. They cannot because of security concerns. And so, yeah, you could say that you can occasionally see Chinese in Gilgit-Baltistan. There, because they work on the highway, they've done a fantastic job over there, I must say, and they're needed there all the time because the mountains keep crumbling. It's a very unstable geological area.
Again, it's infrastructure building, isn't it?